Hey, friends. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about the 2026 F1 regulations. It's nearly upon us, a new Formula One regulation cycle. While Dick has worked hard to make these very complicated rules as layperson friendly as possible. As you'll hear, there are some significant changes. Hopefully, Dick's explanations will enable you to better understand these changes and have reasonable expectations as to what we may see on track. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, Dick, this is a long promised, long awaited recording session, conversation.
Yeah.
And I have to say before we even get started, I have already seen your notes and I think you have done a fantastic job.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
want the audience to know it was a hard challenge, but as always, you rose to the challenge. And I'm so impressed. And I have a lot of questions, which
Yep.
you are willing to let me ask.
Yep.
And hopefully, these are some of the questions that the audience will be asking. And I'm sitting in that seat with them. And of course, there are a couple of other sessions that we've had conversations on, one of them being the Aero 101, that I
Right.
think people should go back to if they haven't listened to it, that will help in some of these definitions and terms, which I'll try to highlight when we're talking about it. But I don't want to give a lot of intro because really, Dick, I think you've done such an excellent job. So let's just get straight to the conversation. The
Yeah.
2026 rules that F1 is going to be implementing. I can't even believe it's already 2026. It's
I
crazy,
know.
but
It's just crazy.
it
It's
really is.
crazy.
So I'm going to let you take the lead and get us started.
Okay. No problem at all. So, if you've been following Formula One, you know that we've been in an era really since about 2014 where we were running cars that were turbo hybrids, meaning that they had engines that were V6, 1.6 liter turbocharged engines with a substantial boost in power coming off of two different types of ways to generate electricity. One was called the MGU K, the K being for kinetic, and the MGU H, which is for heat. And the idea was is that the kinetic would be generating energy through the energy that is produced by having to slow a car down, whereas the MGU H or heat is about using the heat energy coming off of an engine to then generate electricity. And the key to that, in case that sounds a little bit confusing, is that you need to realize MGU stands for motor generator unit. And so there literally was a motor generator unit that was somehow activated by the action of the turbocharger and the heat coming off of the turbo, which then converted that heat energy into electricity. And so, not to get too deep into it, that's basically the principle of what we saw really up until Abu Dhabi a month ago. And now that MGU H is gone, but the MGU K is still in effect, as is the fact that the cars are still supposed to be 1.6 liters and they're turbocharged and they're of a V6 layout. So that hasn't changed, but obviously there is a significant change in the fact that one of the big means of generating electricity is now gone. The engines, like I say, obviously has been changed. However, the chassis has also been significantly changed. It is shorter, it is narrower, it will be lighter, and it has something very interesting called active aero, which basically allows the driver to strategically change the wing angle of the front and rear wings, whether they're on the straightaways. In other words, they're going to lay the wings flat going down the straightaways because The flat wing produces less downforce, but you don't need it because you're going in a straight line. And that then reduces drag, which allows you to go faster down the straights. But then you can pop the wings up and change that configuration once you get to the corner so that the trailing edge of the wing pops up. And next thing you know, you're producing all sorts of downforce. And of course, you're going to produce more drag. And like Sabrina said, we talk about this a lot in our podcast. It's entitled Aero 101. And so if you haven't heard that one, I'd say go and give it a listen. I will say that active aero actually was tried back in 1969, believe it or not. And it, at the time, given the technology and the engineering and all that, it was banned after a few races because it was dangerous. There was a lot of accidents that happened as a result of the active aero not actually being all that active. Let's just leave it at that. And there was a lot of crashes that didn't kill anybody, but they were of serious enough nature that it was sort of like, yeah, we're going to ban them now before somebody gets really hurt. So this is what's old is now new, I guess is probably the best way to put it. So that's an interesting deal.
You mentioned that there were previous eras where we had active aero and it was just very short time period. I want to just plug another episode, which was we did one on the F1 safety. I think we called it notable deaths that impacted the safety rules of F1. And in there, you went into great detail about where active aero caused some significant tragedies inside of the Formula
Yep.
One world at the time. So I would
Yep.
encourage people to also go watch, or excuse me, go listen to that episode as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great call out. And I think as we talk more and more about these rules, we're going to get deeper into the engine here, but strategy is going to become not only about tire management, but also how do I manage the electricity that is in the battery of this car? Because with this rule change, we're now looking at about 57% of the horsepower coming from the internal combustion engine that is, the ICE that is in the car, which will now be fueled by a fully renewable fuel. It's not going to be petroleum based. It's going to be some sort of a synthetic renewable kind of fuel. And so that's going to be a change. And so if the cars, I think they're projected to put out 1,000 horsepower total, so about the same as what they had last year, but only 570 horsepower is coming from the internal combustion engine, and the electrical component is going to produce about 430. And this is going to have some ramifications that we'll talk about here very shortly. But anyway, energy management is going to be a big deal, and just as much as when do I need to pit for new tires? So that's just one more area of strategy that might be interesting. It might be really annoying too. The big risk is that this is either going to make passing either more creative or reduce it. It's hard to say. The difference will be how does the FIA react to the rules and how energy is to be managed, and then how will the teams deploy that? And so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. How quickly do you think we'll see which of these two options it could be? More passing and being creative about it, or the reducing it to just simply that button press of engineering?
I think that what we'll see is probably early on way more passing because everybody's going to be figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And the
Mhm.
ones who get it right more often, they may have the slowest car, but if they get it right on their energy deployment, they could be passing people that you wouldn't expect to be passed. So
So,
I
like,
think
do you
it,
think in like the first 2 to 3 races, we'll start to see?
yeah, I think it'll be further down the road than just two or three races, but I think you'll
Okay.
start seeing a convergence of how the strategies work and all that. And my guess is that at some stage it'll be back to being just as difficult as it's always been.
Okay. I have more questions, but I know that you have more content, and my question can wait till you cover a little bit more.
Yep, sounds good. So let's go look at the first thing, the really big change, even though on the face of it, it doesn't sound like it's that big of a change, but it's actually pretty radical. And that's the engine or power unit, right? And like we talked about already, the base architecture of the engine has been retained, but it's been rebalanced. The internal combustion engine is such that it now plays a smaller role in the overall output that is available to the driver, with a very large increase in the usable electric power. Like we said before, the MGU H, or the motor generator unit heat, has been removed. This was a very expensive component, and the auto manufacturers were very much interested in seeing that go away. So, in the interest of cost, that was removed, and it's also was an inducement, part of the inducement that got manufacturers like Audi and Ford involved. That actually, from a commercial standpoint, that's a very good thing. Now, with the MGU H being removed, that means that the motor generator unit K for kinetic has to be bigger, especially if it's going to be producing that much extra power. And so remember, in the formula that we just left, the total hybrid kick that we were getting was somewhere between 100 and 150 horsepower. Now it's going up to about 430 to 450 horsepower. So that's, what, a 3x jump, right? And so that says to me that there's been such a greater emphasis on the electrification of the units that this is going to then have implications on the racing. And we'll be talking about that more as we get going. But this was certainly something that was done in an effort to attract more automobile manufacturers and to say, hey, the engines that, or the power units that we're producing, are more relevant to the road.
Okay, yeah, that was actually my question is, do you see these changes as a part of, like, when we look at motorsports as a whole and this effort towards more of the electrification of motorsports and trying to see like the innovative side, especially of Formula One, trying to see, can this help in building out a more electrical car? And then
Right.
is the hope that that'll produce innovation that'll translate into road car technology, and even maybe not even technology as much as efficiency?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, let's face it, auto racing has always been a proving ground for manufacturers. When they get involved, racing just improves the breed. I think in this case, because everybody seems to really feel like electrification is the way to go in order to be more attractive as a road going laboratory, let's put it that way. Yeah, I think that this was a real inducement for a lot of these manufacturers. I mean, Ferrari's going to be there regardless. Mercedes
Right.
probably is going to be there regardless, but an Audi, a Cadillac, a Ford, they probably needed something else, even though all of them are losing money, as we all well know. Every fully electric vehicle that they sell, they're losing money on. So it's their interest in the hybrid car has to become more and more interesting given the economics of producing a fully electric car.
Yeah, it seems so interesting to me because of the fact that when you look at the actual population, it doesn't seem like there's a high demand
No.
of wanting to convert to a full electric. I
Yep.
do see a lot of people who are willing to try the hybrid, but
Yep.
even that, it's not. I mean, there's many of us who really want the combustible engine, right? That's the correct
Yeah.
term. Yeah, the
Yeah.
combustible traditional engine versus what seems to be this high dependence on electric screens and
Yep.
a lot more technology.
Yep.
And I guess maybe I'm finding myself being more and more old school. I'm like, I don't want all that in my car. I just want my car. I
Yeah.
want to feel the car. So it seems a little bit seismic to me that the Formula One has made this change. Am I right in that perception?
Yeah. And I think that in many respects, Formula One may have gone in the wrong direction in that they are so focused on getting the manufacturers involved, which I get, but they may be so focused on what the manufacturers want that they've ignored what the fans want. And we can talk about this later, but I think most fans are already saying that the turbo hybrid that we had from 2014 to 2025 was already pretty sterile. And now we're going into something that's even more sterile. And by that, I mean, it's just, yeah, okay, the technology is amazing and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't exactly excite you from a visceral standpoint.
Yeah, I want to definitely let's put that. I'm writing on my notes to do the conversation a little bit more on that topic
Sure,
because I don't want to get us off track because you've got so much great content that you've compiled for us. So
sure.
tell us okay, so you've talked about the MGU K, MGU H. What about the sustainability fuel requirement?
Yeah, so that's the other thing is that F1 has set some pretty aggressive goals for itself in terms of sustainability and carbon footprint and all those kinds of things. And so part of the sustainability drive and hopefully the carbon footprint as well is that they have to run on 100% sustainable fuel. And it's a pretty advanced kind of deal that it has to be certified and it's supposed to be made from like non-food biomass that could capture feedstocks, that sort of thing. In my opinion, it's this may be new to Formula One, but it's really not that new to auto racing in that, like IndyCar has been running on a renewable fuel in various guises for years now. I mean, they ran on ethanol for many years. Prior to that, they ran on methanol. And now they're running what is now being tabbed as a sustainable fuel. Good for F1. I'm sure that the fuel that they're running is going to be way more potent than what we're seeing anywhere else, including IndyCar, but it's nothing new. I guess that's my point.
Okay, so then if IndyCar's been doing this, what's the upside and even the downside of such a change? I mean, like for those of us who, or no, so no, I shouldn't say those of us. For those who are not concerned about sustainability within motorsport, I'm wondering, like in the F1 context, what's likely to be the con or the complaint resulting from the change? And then from those who want to see F1 be a leader in sustainability efforts, what is the pro and the advantage to going towards this type of change if you can kind of take any data from what IndyCar has been doing for years?
Really, what it is that it gets down to how the combustion chambers are shaped and how the fuel injection nozzles, there's a thing called direct injection, which is what IndyCar has gone to because of these sustainable fuels. And I'm sure Formula One is following suit. But it really does change the internal shape of the combustion chamber and how fuel is delivered into the engine. I think that's the big thing, which again, the manufacturers really like. From an IndyCar perspective, this has been really, really good for Chevy and Honda because they have been able to, I mean, they've been building this engine for 13 years now. So they really understand it, and which I think is really, really interesting because Honda's now with Aston Martin and Chevy slash General Motors, Cadillac, guarantee you there will be some crossover of at least learnings as those engines are being developed for Formula One.
That's really interesting piece.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see any cons to this?
I really don't. Anytime that you can go in and do something that reduces the carbon footprint, that's always a good thing. There's a lot of people who tell you that oil is too valuable to burn. It needs to be used for other things like making plastics and stuff like that. So, kind of an interesting take on it. So, hey, if we can find a way to save a few barrels of oil every year, why not?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it seems like on the surface, especially for those who are very focused on sustainability, who kind of put a bullseye on motorsport and Formula One, hopefully they can see that this is an innovation that could translate into other areas. I can't imagine that. I mean, yes, it'll be a few barrels, but it's not enough to truly change carbon footprint in the landscape of the actual race and what we're talking about. But in
Right.
a overall premise or precedent setting, it could truly have some changes, I
Yep.
guess.
It's really going to be for every kilogram of fuel will this sustainable fuel have as many BTUs or more as you would have from a petroleum-based fuel. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's really
Mm-hmm.
what it's going to come down to.
Okay, what about like the technical limits and things like that?
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of, I guess, tighter limits, I guess is the best way to put it, on the exotic materials. Everything's going to have to be a lot more strictly homologated to contain those costs. Because again, they're trying to make it more attractive to new manufacturers coming in. And so they're doing away with some of the really exotic stuff that some of the manufacturers were doing before with the old formula.
Okay, now that seems contra to like the premise of what Formula One has been known for, of
I know,
innovation.
right?
Like it seems like you're moving the cars more to a spec car. Am I
Yeah.
hearing you right?
Well, I don't know that it's so much a spec car. It's just that, there may be some special alloy or something that was developed that's got certain expansion properties that are superior to another alloy that is typically used to make, let's say, a piston. And so they're saying, yeah, yeah, you can't do that anymore.
I
One of
don't know
those
how I
kinds of
feel
things.
about that.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
know.
know. That seems kind of, I don't know, it just feels
Counterintuitive.
wrong. Yeah, and wrong. Like you're already saying that there are areas where you really want this innovation. You're kind of prescribing where innovation is allowed. And you're saying you have to focus on the power unit and fuel, but all these other things that could also give you that edge. I don't know. It just doesn't feel
Or
right
make
to
the
me.
engine work better,
Yeah.
given the constraints of the sustainable fuel. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
What else?
And then the last thing is that there is the driver operated boost modes for the electricity. I mean, you have to think about it like the old KERS boost that they used to have in Formula One, where you could push a button and release a bunch of additional power from an electrical standpoint. It's a little bit like the push to pass system used on an Indy car as well, because either one of those.
So this is already seen in IndyCar.
Yeah,
Okay.
IndyCar's got two different kinds of driver overrides. One is that it bumps the boost of the turbocharger. The
Mm-hmm.
other one is again they've got a hybrid system as well. Obviously not nearly as powerful, but the the driver has the option of deploying battery power or more power from the turbocharger, or he can do both.
Okay, so then what does this mean for the driver? I mean, like their driving styles, they already have, like, I've watched a video recently that showed all the steering wheels across the different teams. Like, they have a
Yep.
ton of buttons that are all configured
Yep.
differently based on the teams. So, what does this mean for like the driver's technique and like their racecraft? Is it, I mean, because the IndyCar is much more spec,
Yep. Much
right?
simpler. Much
Yeah.
simpler.
Then
Yep.
what a Formula One car is, are steering wheels also as complicated?
Yeah, they're pretty complicated.
But did they change across teams?
No, because they all come from Cosworth.
Do you
So
see
it's
where my like
yeah, yeah,
analysis is trying to figure out like if okay, so for example, you have Isaac who just now got promoted up to the Red Bull. I guess that's not the best one because it's two sister teams. Maybe it's similar. But like okay, if Max decides to go to Aston Martin
yep,
and the configuration of that steering wheel is going to be different, is that like those are all thought processes and things that the driver has to adapt
yep,
to,
yep,
and so now you've got now this additional thing of this boost, which has implications if done incorrectly, right?
sure,
And then
sure,
you add
yeah,
in the active aero business. Like it feels like we're adding a whole bunch of things that could
oh, we
significantly
are,
complicate
oh
and
yeah,
increase the risk.
yep, yep,
Okay.
yeah. I
So
don't know
my
that.
anxiety all of a sudden going up is
Well,
not unfounded.
you're not increasing physical risk, but you're increasing the chances of a driver going the wrong direction, and deploying their battery too soon, or
Mhm.
something like that. Which I'm okay. I'm just going to say, as an old school racer, it
Mhm.
should not be about when do I deploy power, knowing that I'm not going to have that power for very long.
Mm-hmm.
When you're
Mm-hmm.
talking 43% of your power that is available to you is on a finite scale where you have to go back and then recharge a battery.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it's going to have an impact for sure.
Well, it also feels like it actually is more similar to a video game
Yeah.
versus actual driving, because
Yeah.
in video games you have those things where you have to wait and you have to earn something to get that extra
Right.
boost, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
maybe for our younger drivers who have grown up in the video age, this won't be as quote risky or challenge. That'll be very natural. But I
Right.
wonder if our more traditional seasoned racers who aren't really growing up in that video age will find that bridge a little challenging.
Yeah. I think I think it's possible. The good news, of course, is that they're all living in the simulators at this stage,
That's true.
right? So
That's
that's going
true.
to be the other part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but I
So
will tell
anything
you
else?
this, I think in a nutshell, what it really means is this could very well wind up being a contest of who could build the best battery.
Yeah, it does sound like that. The
Yeah.
one that can both create, reprocess, and then deploy it out, reserve it, don't lose
Yep.
in all those micro transitions between each stage.
Agreed.
Okay, what about the chassis?
So the chassis is also changing. Gone is ground effect. And I think all of the drivers are going to be thrilled to say goodbye to the ground effect mode, some more than others. Lewis Hamilton comes to mind very quickly. But even Max said, with all his success and all that, he said, hey, the cars really weren't all that nice to drive because of the high spring rates that they had to run, because you got to run the car really low and there's the porpoising and bouncing the chassis against the pavement and all that kind of jazz. So no more ground effect, which also means that we've got a lower downforce package on the car. The cars are going to be shorter. They're going to be narrower. They're going to be about 30 kilograms lighter. And the rules are aiming for about 30% less downforce and about 55% less drag, which is pretty astonishing when you think about it. I mean, 30% less downforce. If the cars wind up sliding around a lot more, that's going to be fun to watch, assuming the drivers are permitted, to be driving on the limit, which again, if they're having to compromise their driving styles just to make sure their battery is getting recharged, that may not be the case. But 55% less drag, man, the cars ought to be rocket ships in a straight line. So they're going to have the reduced ground effect, like we were talking about, compared to the previous era car. And again, they're going to have active aerodynamics. And again, this is the front and rear wings are now movable. You lay them flat going down the straightaway, which is where a lot of that drag reduction comes from. Because, on some circuits, you think about Monaco, I mean, they might as well be pulling a barn door through the air right now because the rear wings are so big. I mean, within the rules, they're just massive. But then if you can lay them flat, most of the drag created by the wing goes away. And then, of course, they pop them up for going into the corners and produce all sorts of downforce. So that's pretty interesting. There's going to be changes to, for example, the wheel arches that we got used to seeing on the F1 cars at the front, those are gone. There's other changes that, I won't get into, but, like the barge boards and stuff like that you see hanging off the cars that are all about channeling the air and all that. There's been restrictions on those. And then last but not least, the chassis are also going to be safer because the testing standards are more stringent now. And so every Formula One tub, once it's designed for a particular season, the survival cell, as they call it nowadays, that the driver sits in, it has to undergo crash testing, head-on crashes, side impacts, all that kind of stuff. And so the engineers, again, are being challenged to produce something that is stronger and yet lighter. Again, they're developing all sorts of stuff that eventually will probably find its way in some guise into road cars to make them safer.
Okay. So tell me, on the lighter, smaller, lower downforce package, What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it'll be good? Will it really make for better racing? Like, is it a noticeable differential?
Yeah, I mean, 30% downforce, less downforce is really significant. And I think that you're going to see the cars sliding around quite a bit. They're not going to be cornering as fast. I think that lap times I've heard are going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 seconds a lap slower than what we've been seeing. I mean, those ground effects cars, I mean, they were planted because they produce so much downforce. I've been in the game long enough to know that, yeah, that they may achieve that 30% downforce goal, they being the people who drew up the rules. But at the end of the day, I also know that there's a whole bunch of really, really smart guys and gals working for those teams, and they're going to claw back all of that loss of downforce and more over the course of the years, going forward on these regulations. We'll see more downforce in 2027 and 2028. I guarantee you, because they'll find a way to do it.
Okay, and then you said that we may see drivers not driving to the limit. Did I
Yep,
hear you correctly?
you
That
did.
seems counterintuitive when we talk about
Completely,
racing.
completely. And this is where my issue starts cropping up with this whole set of regulations. Because electrification is now such a massive component of the overall engine package, you've got to make sure that you've got a battery that is charged up. Well, how do you charge up your battery now? Well, with the MGU K, it actually gets recharged under the brakes or the car slowing down. Okay. In other words, you could let off the gas if you had to and recharge the battery that way. Of
That's
course,
insane to me.
of
You're
course.
slowing down in a race?
You're slowing down in order to go faster overall
Oh
for a
my
complete
word.
lap. Yeah. And that's why there's so many people who are purists like me who are saying this is not racing. This is a bunch of, well, I'll leave it at that. This is supposed to be
Yeah.
G rated.
Yes. Okay, I feel like I'm setting you off, so I probably ought not to ask
You
you
are,
anymore. I
you are.
apologize. Okay, so let me ask
You
you
know,
this
you know, when I
then.
was
Oh,
doing
go
this, I
ahead.
will say this, and this probably reveals more about me than I should reveal, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. One of the main character of the movie F1 is an old school hardcore racer named Sonny Hayes. Doesn't want the trophy, doesn't want the watch. He just wants to win, right? I mean, that's basically him. And he's all about the racing and bending the rules and blah, blah, blah. There's more of Sonny Hayes in me that I care to admit. I'm just going to say that right now because I look at these rules and I'm just kind of going, this ain't racing.
Yeah.
If this pans out this way, and again, I go back, if somebody can figure out how to make a really good battery that will last a full lap and just in the normal course of the lap get recharged the way it's supposed to get recharged, okay, whatever. But, Max Verstappen himself came out and said, I'm not sure I like this, you
It
know.
just there seems to be so many elements here that are counter to
Yep,
what you think of when you say I am doing a race. And
right.
also, yeah. Okay. Well, then let me ask you this. You said the drivers can switch modes within the rules constraints, right? So it seems like that's also opening up for errors and or is definitely seems to me like a tactical decision of when
Oh,
you're going
yeah.
to switch between these modes. Am I right in
Yep,
both of those?
100%.
Some okay.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
mean, and understand, I have no problem with the active arrow. I think that's interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. And of course, I can remember when I was just a little kid, fascinated back in the late '60s when they were going with their version of active arrow,
Mm-hmm.
which they got banned, and they said no movable aerodynamic devices, which meant that
Yeah.
wings couldn't be adjusted while the car was moving, among other things. There's other stories that go with that, like the Brabham fan car,
Right.
but that's another story.
I love that you're bringing that stuff up because I've actually been listening to a different podcast that's been all about the history of F1, and I just finished the one on Brabham. And
Yeah,
I guess that's why I'm listening to you with this recent awareness of history, and I'm just like, why are we doing this? Do we really think that we've advanced such that we can avoid the problems that had happened with that previous era.
Right.
And then you add in all these new innovative areas and I'm trying to wrap my brain around it.
Right.
I don't see it, but I mean it's happening and the teams if they really thought either A, safety or ability to execute this properly, I trust that they would speak up because
Yep.
they have money on the line, they have lives on the line. So
Yep.
it's just going to be interesting to see as a fan, what are we going to be witnessing come Melbourne?
Right.
Or even, I
So,
guess, ahead of that, Bahrain. Um,
yeah.
I can't wait to see, though, this chassis safety aspect that you were talking about because of how they're going to make it lighter but stronger. That's
Yep.
going to be very intriguing.
Very.
Okay, so then tell me, how will the racing change in your mind, kind of leading from what I was saying earlier?
I think it's going to be really interesting because, as we've talked about before, it's hard to follow closely in Formula One because of the turbulence coming off of the wings. Now, it's going to be one of those things where, as you're going down the straight and everybody has their wings flat, the turbulence is going to be considerably less. So you should be able to follow more closely. But what's interesting is that the moment that the car in front activates their wings and gets ready for a corner, suddenly that turbulence reappears. And depending on how it all works, I think the effect is still going to be very, very strong on the following car in terms of turbulence and reduced effectiveness of your wings, especially at the front of the car. So I don't know, they're hoping that this was going to make the passing easier. I kind of doubt it, but I'm happy to be wrong.
I agree. I mean, I'm kind of excited in one sense, but I feel like a cautious optimism, even though I have a lot of skepticism. I don't know how to explain that. It's like a two warring sides of me right now. One of me
Yep.
wants to believe, oh, this would be great. And the other one goes, but this doesn't make any sense. It
Right.
seems so counter to everything that I've
Right.
understood about motorsport. Okay, so then what about like the less reliance on ground effect and like helping in the following? Do you think that it may increase risk in any
Mm,
way to the drivers?
I don't think so. The cars are going to be very, very different. Assuming they have full power, both cars that we're used to seeing versus the new cars are going to be punching a smaller hole in the air. They're lighter, so they should accelerate faster. They should be faster in a straight line, but they're going to be slower in the corners. Net, they're saying that the new cars are going to be 2 to 3 seconds a lap slower. Although, again, I think that over time, they're going to be probably turning lap times pretty close to what we saw with the ground effects car. That would be my guess, but it'll be several seasons before we get there.
Okay, so when you say that there could be fights in the in the middle of the corner, is that like we're thinking, what was it? I can't remember what year it was, but Silverstone, the whole Checo Charles battle, and then Lewis kind of slides in there, right? And there goes
Yeah,
Hamilton, that phrase of Crofty saying it. Are you saying we would see more of that happening?
it's possible. And again, it's how are you harvesting the energy that because I think that's going to take precedence over everything.
Mm-hmm.
A guy may give up time in a corner, but do a better job of recharging his battery. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's got more juice at the end of the next long straightaway than the other guy.
Yeah.
So you could have a pass in one corner, and then, 3 turns later, you're on a long straightaway, and the guy who just got passed repasses the guy that passed him in the corner. So who knows? That's the scenario, though, that I think I see. But again, it goes
Mm-hmm.
back to not so much is who's on the limit through a corner, which is kind of what it's supposed to be about, versus who did a better job of managing their energy so that they're faster down the straightaway.
Right. And that's not even factoring in things like the track conditions, tire
Right.
conditions, weather, all that kind of stuff that you also are still, oh wow, there's going to be so much. No
Yep.
wonder like I've been kind of watching a few of the socials and heard that one of the drivers, it might have been Alex, who said that it's just been a very short break. They really only had the holidays and they're back at it more than
Hmm.
any other winter break season. They've
Yep.
had to just stay in it. And listening to you, I can see why they can't let up on anything because whatever peak that they had like performance wise, even if they were exhausted by the end of 2025 season, it's like almost like they can't let off the gas because there's too many things that are about to be deployed at them. They got to stay in that mindset of competition and optimization, which is
Yep.
going to be, yeah, it's going to be rough for the guys. Okay. So tell us, what about race pace and like lap profiles?
Well, again, it's still subject to conjecture. I mean, some people say, oh, it'll only be, because the cars are so much faster in a straight line than what we've been used to seeing, it'll only be about a second difference. And then there's others that say, yeah, but they're going to be much slower in the corners. And so they'll be 2 to 3 seconds slower. I tend to go with the 2 to 3 seconds. But, honestly, Sabrina, nobody watching on TV or in the grandstands is going to be able to tell the difference in the lap times. Where they're going to see it is that if the cars are sliding around more, it's going to look more exciting.
Okay. So we're wanting them to slide.
I think it would be great. I mean, if you think about it, the cars today are so planted that some
Mm-hmm.
of the corners that used to kind of take our breath away, they're really not even corners anymore because there's so much downforce coming in. But you think about, oh, the corner at the end of the long straightaway at Suzuka, I think it's called 130R.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And right. And I mean, you watch Senna going through on his qualifying lap in the late 80s, and I mean, it just take your breath away because the guy is so clearly on the limit. Whereas the guys today go through, they're also on the limit, but it's nowhere near as dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's good because for those of us who have come in like the last 10 years or so, we don't have a frame of reference.
No.
So if anything, going and watching previous eras, like during the time of Senna, it sounds
Yeah.
like going and watching some of those races, that might help us to have a marker of what we
Right.
should be hopefully expecting. Okay, that's
Right.
good. That's
Yeah.
good. And we have
Yeah.
plenty
It's
of
sort of
time.
like the onboard camera of Senna qualifying at Suzuka
Hmm.
or at Monaco is far more awe-inspiring
Yeah,
than the onboard video of the guys today, even though they're way faster.
right. Because there feels like there's a higher volume of control in the cars today,
Yep.
where you're right, where you feel like when you're watching someone like Senna or his era, they're wrestling the car, but they're
Yep.
making it look seamless when they're doing it right.
Yeah. I mean, they're
Yeah.
they're taming the beast,
Hmm.
whereas here it doesn't feel that way.
Okay. So we've talked about the chassis, power unit, fuel. What are you getting the sense of when it comes to the tire?
Well, hard to say. It's still going to be an 18-inch diameter wheel that the tire gets mounted to. The tires are going to be narrower, both front and rear. And so who knows what the compounds are and what the tire wear is going to look like and all that kind of stuff, because with the reduced aero, the cars are going to be sliding more, which means that there's going to be more tire wear. Managing tires is still going to be a big deal.
Interesting. Okay. Do you think this will also reduce the porpoising like with that softer suspensions?
Yeah, because
Okay.
the porpoising all came from, the fact
Stiffness
that the
of
cars, yeah, you had stiff springs and then you had a car that was running really, really low,
Mhm.
and you're not going to have that issue this time. And the softer springs also will give more mechanical grip in the corners, which will claw back a little bit of the aerodynamic loss of grip by going away from those tunnels. So there'll be a little bit of an advantage there. Probably see that more in the low speed corners than in the high speed corners. But yeah,
Hmm.
yep,
And considering that, especially towards the end of the year, the drivers were really complaining about the toll this was taking on their back.
Right.
regardless of the fact that porpoising kind of seemed to at least visually have reduced over the course of the year, it was still happening and they were having to deal with the effects of that. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that if that can make it a little bit easier on the toll on their bodies, that
Right.
I think is fair and good.
Yep.
Okay. All right, where we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but what about the strategy and like pit stops? What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, first of all, again, energy management, I think that's going to become the main focus of all the teams. When to deploy, when to harvest, all of those kinds of things. As far as pit stops and all that, I think it's still going to come down to the old balance, like when we talked to Malcolm Finch in our podcast where we talked to him about strategy and all that. It really comes down to the difference between the new tire, the old tire, who's pitted when. Do we try it for the undercut? Do we try for the overcut? That kind of stuff. And so I think that that game is probably not going to change. It's just that there's added complexity now on the energy management piece. I mean, you could see somebody saying, "Well, I'm going to really smoke my in lap by saving up a little bit of extra energy storage so that I'm really, really fast down the straightaways to better my chances of passing the guy that I'm trying to get around of who's in front of me." Something like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it seems like it would have really the potential to be very dramatic. I mean, because if all the analysis and history and data was under the previous rules and like the track historical information, and it seems like that's a lot of what these teams use to
Yep.
decide, on the strategy of energy management and pit stopping, all that, like tire deg where they
Right.
can kind of forecast it. It seems like based on all these changes, they may be going in a little bit in the dark now because
Oh,
they
I
can't
think
really
so.
rely on all that
Yep.
for setup. And then it will increase the importance of FP1 and FP2 having a full session without red flags, without weather, and as comparable, I guess three. FP3 would be the one closest to race day, right?
Well,
Timing
yeah,
wise.
race day or
Yeah.
qualifying. Yeah, either
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So it seems like this will be kind of an equalizer, and like probably the strategy teams are trying to figure all that stuff out too right
Yep.
now and have been for quite some time using the simulators to figure out the implications. And then with the development process having been, many months and years, it seems like that probably was an evolution that they were probably just as long, right alongside as they were doing the development, the strategy team probably had to be working and innovating right along with them over this time to at least create something of data wise to prepare them for these initial races.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So then I'm loving that the fact that the pit stops and the windows may change, that quali and race trade off. I think all those kinds of things are kind of cool. Do you want to go into any of that?
Well, I think the one thing that we need to think about is, and again, who knows what the regulations are going to be for Parc Fermé, but I think that it would be very easy to see that there is going to be significant differences in how you set the car up for qualifying, where you're going to go for sheer speed versus what you're going to do for a race, where you're going to say, okay, yeah, we got to look after the tires, but now we've also got to look after how are we deploying the energy and all that. It's one thing, I think, to go out and put in one really hard qualifying lap and say, we're not that concerned about tire wear. We're not that concerned about how much energy deploy. We just want to get the optimum out of the tires, and we don't want to deploy every kilowatt of energy that we've got for our qualifying effort. That will not be the case in the race. And I think that you'll see race pace again significantly lower than what qualifying speeds are.
Okay, reverse back for just a second. What do you mean it's wait to be seen about Park Ferme? They can change those rules too?
Well, sure, because some cases you make a setup change and it optimizes things for qualifying, but it may not be perfect for the race or vice versa, right? And
Right.
so you can't make that change once the car is qualified. So they may say, okay, you can't touch the car when it's in park for May, but we're going to give you an extra 30 minutes on Sunday morning to make additional changes that you deem necessary or something like that.
Oh,
That's what I was trying to drive at.
I see. Has that ever happened? Like that was allowed in the rules?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that before Park for May was introduced, you'd have a qualifying setup. Hell, you could even have a qualifying engine that was good for, that might last 3 or 4 laps because it put out so much horsepower that that's as long as it would last and then it would blow up. And so you qualify with the qualifying engine and really, really soft, sticky tires. And then for the race, you'd put on a much harder compound tire and a much more durable, less powerful engine.
You can't see my face right now. My jaw is wide open. I am like, what? This is, wait a minute. I had
Oh yeah.
no idea this was the real when, well then when did we institute Park for May as we see it today?
Well, I don't know exactly when it was instituted, but if you go back and you look at like the Brabham BMW turbocharged engines in the early 80s, they
Mm-hmm.
had special qualifying engines that were putting out like 1,500 horsepower, but they raced with considerably less power because the engines couldn't take it. And
Oh,
they literally would
wow.
change engines on Saturday night and put a different motor in.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to some of the other episodes that on that other podcast and see if I somehow just missed that. But this is so fascinating, and I would love that. I think that's a whole nother tactical element that would be fantastic to see if they would do that. I mean, because
Right.
then you would really have two different cars in a sense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, I love that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting us off track. Okay, let's talk about what could go wrong. What do you see as possibilities?
I think that there's going to be the possibility of a whole lot more reliability issues because we're talking about now active aero. And while the way they're going about the active aero this time around versus what they did in the 1960s, of course, is way different. But I think that there's potential there for the electromechanical actuation systems failing or something like that. Not so much a wing falling off the car, which is what was happening the first time around they were doing this. I don't think you're going to do that, but I do think that there's going to be some issues there. And I think that it's very likely that you could have some fairly artificial racing. And by that, I mean, it's like we were describing, one driver drives slowly through a corner to make sure he's got a full battery charge for the next straightaway, whereas another guy goes a little faster through the corner, executes a pass, but then runs out of electricity halfway down the straightaway, and the guy he just passed passes him again. It's kind of artificial. Will we see that? I kind of expect we will. I could be wrong. And even though they're trying to say, oh yeah, by getting rid of the MGU H off the engine, we're reducing complexity and all that, which is true, they are, but they're doing other things that are going to increase that complexity, not the least of which is the fact that you're putting in a much more powerful electrical system. And so there's going to be areas there where I think stuff's going to fail, batteries and all that kind of stuff. So,
I agree because listening to you, that was the thing that I kept coming back to is the more components you put in, the more opportunities for failure or error. And it just seems like that we're in the sense that there were previous eras where reliability was so much more of an issue. And we've been
right.
in this era where it feels like consistency and reliability has been strong.
Yeah.
We maybe that's the part that's going to get fans emotional is like when you're watching the car and then all of a sudden just they're going off, and the battery has died and the car just stops and then we have a red flag and then that starts the whole cascade of
Yep.
strategic thinking, I guess. Rather than overtaking, I'd rather have high stakes versus wah wah, the car's gone, the car's not
Yeah.
moving anymore. And
Right.
and then you have a red flag, takes time, and then we have to be thinking, okay, will they be able to get to the full laps needed? It just
Yep.
seems like it has the potential to be a problem, I guess. And which is
Yep.
why you're saying what could go wrong. So what other
Yep.
areas do you see?
Well, of course, who knows? I mean, there's always the concern about the power unit manufacturers, one getting it right, like Mercedes did the last time, and then everybody else spending years playing catch up. FIA is very concerned about this, and they're actually, and we'll talk about this here in just a minute, but they are definitely concerned about it, and they're looking for a way to allow teams to catch up if they don't get it right. So that's good, but nevertheless, if you've got an advantage, either chassis or engine wise, that the other guys don't have, you're going to enjoy an advantage for a while anyway. And I think that that's very likely. I mean, at the early stages of anytime you go to a new rig, the gap between the fastest car in the field and the slowest car in the field is going to be much greater than it would be like we saw here at the end of this set of
Mhm.
technical regs at Abu Dhabi.
Well, it also seems like some of the ways that the gains from the cost gap might be lost for these smaller teams, unless they are
Yeah,
like customers of manufacturers who got it right when it
right,
comes to the power unit. Like I'm
right.
thinking of like a Williams, if
Yep.
Mercedes gets it right, Williams might have a significant advantage over
Ferrari.
maybe Ferrari and Haas, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I
I think,
also, there's something in me that also doesn't like the idea that if someone does get it right, that we're going to allow for that gap to decrease.
yep.
I don't know. It seems like if somebody got it right, let them be able to take advantage of the fact that they figured it out, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, we'll talk about that in the next section under
Oh, okay.
implications. Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. What other problems do you see potentially happening then?
Well, we already kind of talked about it. I think that the whole passing thing could be very interesting. And so I don't know about that. The other thing is that there's a lot of really smart guys that are sitting here from a strategy standpoint that will probably come up with some fairly unusual tactics just because these cars, the way they're powered, is highly unusual. And so I think that there's going to be gray areas are going to be exploited for sure. So I think that that's going to be definitely something else to think of. And then last but not least, and I've already alluded to this, the rules seem to have been drawn up solely with the manufacturers in mind. They haven't really, I don't think, thought much about the fans. And again, I could be wrong, but just the visceral sound of the hybrid engines that we've been listening to for the last 11 years has been pretty uninspiring. And there's a lot of fans who want to see the V8, the V10, the V12 come back because of the sound. And there was a lot of people who a couple years ago, Fernando Alonso at Abu Dhabi drove his championship winning Renault. I can't remember if it was the 2005 or the 2006 car. But anyway, normally aspirated, screaming at, I don't know, 17, 18,000 RPMs. And you had to have ear protection for just one car, let alone 20. And now you go to an F1 race, you don't need air protection at all. When all 20 cars are on track, it's like, no big deal. I think that there's going to be a lot of disappointed fans. And if the drivers are having to compromise how they drive corners simply because they have to charge the battery, I think that's going to cause a disenchantment of the fans too. The fans that came in as a result of Drive to Survive, who are more interested in the glitz and glamour and the political maneuvering behind the scenes and all the drama and all that kind of stuff, they probably won't notice the on-track product. Let's call it that. But those who have been following the sport for a long time, I think there's a very good chance that whatever that percentage of fans are, is it 50%? I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of us longtime fans who could be extremely disappointed.
Yeah, I think that you raised some really good points. I mean, when we were at Coda, you and I talked about this, that I was kind of surprised at how muted I felt the Formula One cars were in comparison to the Porsches that were doing their
Yeah,
races.
yeah.
And
The Porsche sounded better.
yeah, it really did. And just having gone to some other races here locally, I also felt that way. But then interestingly, I encountered a couple while I was shopping. That was a couple of weeks ago, I think now. They might be listening. And they were noting that they were at the Vegas race and they felt that the sound was quite substantial and the feeling was quite substantial. And the
Hmm.
only thing, and in the conversation, the only thing I could think of was, Well, you have a street circuit versus a traditional circuit racetrack, and that's going to feel very different when you have buildings that are going to echo and hold the sound very differently. The you have a street versus a purpose-built track, which is going to feel very different. And with the way the calendar has been changing and more street tracks showing up, I wonder if that is kind of a quiet way of trying to give that feel that we want, because
Yep.
I'm like you, I want to feel that car. And I think it was actually Joe Sayward, his interview, he highlighted
Hmm.
that the big challenge for F1 leadership is if they want to have kids and families come, parents are concerned about hearing loss. I didn't say this to Joe because, of course, he's the guest, and I would never. I wanted to ask him at some point, like, well, we have now all this technology for ear protection that's better than ever before. I
Right.
feel like those are some of the things that we could do without losing, like, what has been the classic power of the car,
Yep.
and get so it still maintains some of the strength of what I think so many of us want to have, that visceral feeling. Like I want to feel shaken by the car when it goes past me. That
Yeah.
just, and I didn't grow up watching the races, and
Oh, yeah.
it was just a surprise, I guess. So I just say if that's where we're going, I'm a little like you in that sense, going bring it back, bring back the V10s and 8 and 12s. I
Yep.
would much rather have that feeling,
You know,
especially
and
when we're talking about like the experience. I don't think we feel it in as a spectator on TV, but if you're going there and spending the money, I want to feel those cars.
for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I guess Coda opened in 2012, I think it was.
Yes.
And, my son Derek and I went to the race to watch qualifying. And they hadn't figured out transportation to and from the track and all that kind of stuff. And we thought we got there in plenty of time to take the bus into the track and all the, remote parking, blah, blah, blah. And it didn't work. We were sitting on the bus and we could hear FP3 running. We were miles away. And there was just this unearthly howl coming from the direction of Circuit of the Americas. And that was in the days of the normally aspirated V8s, and I mean, it literally, we were probably 3 or 4 miles away, and you could just sense, because of the sound, it was quite loud from that distance. Nowadays, it's sort of like you can have a normal conversation while the cars are going by.
Yeah. Okay, what else do you think could go wrong?
Oh man, I think I've probably covered most of it here. I do think we're going to see reliability issues until they get the cars figured out. I mean, Fred Vasseur has gone so far as to say the first test that they have, which will be Barcelona behind closed doors, they're only interested in getting as many miles on the car as possible.
Okay. So what do you think are some of the implications of all of this?
Well, and a lot of this we've touched on, but for example, the FIA is quite worried that Mercedes is, or somebody is going to get it right like Mercedes did in 2014 and have a big power advantage. And to counter this, the FIA has said that after the first 6 races and then the 12th race and then the 18th race, if an engine manufacturer is judged to be 2 to 4% down on power to the very best engine, they will be allowed to make one change to their engine, because these engines have to be submitted and homologated by the FAA prior to the season starting. And so they can make one change. If they're more than 4% down on power to the best engine, they can make two changes. So they're not telling them what the changes are to make to get more power, but it's allowing the teams to go in and make engineering decisions and say, this is our next best step forward. So this is what we're going to change. Now, how do they figure out the engines that are 2 to 4% down on power versus 4%? I don't know how you do that, because in many ways you can kind of extrapolate based on downforce levels and all that kind of stuff. But if the cars are running with 55% less downforce, I don't know. I guess the math will be the same, but boy, oh boy, that's going to be interesting. But anyway, so that's one of the things. Now, the thing that I think is really interesting is that they're saying, oh, well, we're really worried about the internal combustion engine. Well, I would argue that the internal combustion engine's only 53%, which is still the majority of the power is coming from the ICE, but it isn't like 90% like it is today. So any differences are going to be in terms of total horsepower, not that much difference, right? And so I think that's good, but I think that there's other things that are going to be as critical, or I would argue in some cases more critical to the success of a team's campaign for the 2026 season. And in no particular order, again, I go back to who can build the best battery. Because if you have a battery where you run out of electrical power down a long straightaway, think Monza or maybe somewhere at Spa, it doesn't really matter if you have the best ICE because, okay, you have 15 horsepower over the next guy from your ice. But if your battery goes to zero, you've lost 430 horsepower out of the electrical side of it. So who cares? So to me, it's who can build a better battery. I think the next thing, and again, I don't know which one's more important, but how about which team can respond the fastest to develop the areas of weakness into strengths and do it quickly and accurately. In other words, we don't want to have a deal where the wind tunnel says one thing and then they put a piece on the car and they actually go slower, like we see so many teams get it wrong. Well, now you're dealing with battery power as well. So who can react quickest and make the right call, right? That's going to be a big deal. I personally believe that somewhere, somehow, a team or teams are going to come up with ways to exploit the rules and have very sophisticated computer systems that actually take much of the workload off of the driver in terms of managing the energy that is available to them. And whoever can do that first and do it well is probably going to dominate, if I had to guess. And then last but not least, this sounds maybe a little bit crazy, but which fuel supplier does the best job of providing the best fuel? Remember, we were talking earlier about how many BTUs per liter. Whoever's able to cram the most BTUs into a liter of renewable fuel will have an advantage. Again, I would go back and say that's important, but it may not be as important as who's got the better battery. In fact, I would argue that the battery is going to be a big deal. So those are some of the implications that I see.
Yeah, I think that you're so spot on based off of your presentation of the regulations, like where you talk about like the development. I think that that's where I'm listening to you. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I know we have cost cap, but there are still teams that have just higher budgets. And so they're going to have the ability to respond quickly and do it
Oh yeah,
well. And so that's where I think the unintended consequences, their problems will likely arise or the implications for this. The other is I'm fascinated by the idea of a sophisticated computer, but then the other side of me says, we deal with computers every day, and how many times do they fail us when we need them? Like you're writing your presentation and all of a sudden it just goes. So
right.
how do you maintain reliability of all the technological components? I guess maybe because I've been living in the world of yesteryear of Formula One where it was just a machine versus technology, which
Uh-huh.
in my brain is a distinction. There, you had reliability issues there too, but like it used to be where even the driver had the expertise or skill to be able to, like, the car broke down, to figure it out and fix it himself, like I
Yeah,
was listening to the Bruce McLaren and Jack Brabham stories and like how much they were mechanics on their own cars.
right,
And so now, but a sophisticated computer, it's like what we're experiencing even in road cars. Now your mechanic is not just simply knowing skills of mechanical engineering. They need to also have a high level of competence in computers.
right,
And
right.
with that, if you're relying on a sophisticated computer, we also know they like to
Yeah,
just lose it all of a sudden. Like I'm thinking
yeah,
about a couple
they're
months
not
ago,
real
my
good.
computer died,
Yeah,
randomly.
right.
Yeah. That's the stakes, I guess, we're going to be facing in motorsport, or at least in Formula One.
Right.
I love the insight you brought about fuel suppliers, and it seems like that's going to be on teams being able to negotiate and discern whose product is better, similar to what they've been learning about Sims. Because I think we talked about this maybe offline. I had been watching some YouTube videos highlighting that not all Sims are created equal.
Right.
And so if you don't have a sophisticated, highly tuned sim, you're already on the back foot.
Yep.
And it seems like it'll be the same thing if the fuel supplier isn't like they may promise you a lot, but if they don't deliver.
You got Shell with Ferrari, you got Petronas with Mercedes, you got
Hmm.
Aramco with Aston Martin and so forth, right? And somebody's going to get it more right than the others.
I like how you said that. It's not like they're going to get it wrong. It's who's going to get it
Right.
more right than the others. So
Yep.
that's really good. Okay,
Yep.
so what do you think we'll see about the cars? Like, what's the implication there? Like, seeing them on track.
If we go back to the ground effect era, you had the downwash, you had from Red Bull, you had the zero side pod concept with Mercedes. Seems like there was a couple others as well. And that's what everybody started with. But as the years went on, there was a convergence and everybody was dealing with downwash, right? I think that as the season, certainly in 26, I think as they understand active aero, as they understand the energy deployment and all that. I think that is a lot of that goes on. I think that there will be more and more convergence. I think you'll see a much bigger gap in Melbourne than you'll see in Abu Dhabi at the end of the year in terms of relative performance at the front of the field to the end of the field. And of course, you got to believe there's going to be 4 or 5 teams that get it right and everybody else is going to be chasing the other 7 teams will be chasing the other 4. They've got a private test coming up at the end of January in Barcelona. It's a 4-day test. And then there will be a break so that everybody can go back and figure things out and make changes to their cars and all that. And then there will be 2 tests that are public in Bahrain, the first being February 11th to 13th. And then basically a week later, they have their final test in Bahrain, and then they head off to Melbourne. So it's a very compact schedule. And to your point, the off season has basically been restricted to the holidays, and everybody has been working their tails off to get ready.
Yeah, I was feeling exhausted at the end of 25. I can't even imagine what
Yeah.
they are all feeling. And the stakes are so high to get it
Yep.
right. And
Yep.
the years of developing and thinking and strategizing, man, it only makes me respect them more about what we're
Sure.
going to see and hope that, we really the best laid plans do show up and really give us some really good racing. Any other
Yep.
final thoughts or like what do you personally, I know you've tried to be very diplomatic here in your
Right.
presentation, but I'd wonder if you have any other personal thoughts you want to add in before we close out this conversation.
And I hope I'm wrong, but I think the cars are going to become even more sterile than what we've grown accustomed to seeing. And by sterile, I mean, yeah, they're technological marvels and they're really, really fast, but from a orally, from, the sound that makes, I just don't see how the engines can possibly sound very impressive. And I think, yeah, I'm very concerned about the quality of the racing. I hope for the sake of Formula One that my fears are unfounded because I still believe that racing at the end of the day should be a contest between drivers and their cars. And while that may be the case, I think that they've become so geared to what the manufacturers want with seemingly ignoring what the fans want. I think there's a real risk of Formula One falling flat on their face with this thing. And I would hate to see that. But I've been arguing for quite a while that if you want to see really, really good racing, you generally don't go to Formula One races. The cars are amazing and the tracks are amazing and the drivers are amazing and all that stuff. But typically, Formula One doesn't produce great racing. And I fear that it's going to become even less great. I hope I'm wrong, But to give you an idea, and we touched on this, Senna has been dead now for over 30 years, which is hard to imagine. People still talk about Senna, talk about him all the time. Why? Again, he was the guy out there taming the beast who, if you slow down the video of him qualifying at Monaco, for goodness sakes, the guy is in full opposite lock because the car is going sideways on him. He's one-handed, has his left hand steering through the slide, and at the same time, he's reaching down and grabbing the next gear up so he can go faster. That's what people talk about. That's why Senna is revered to this day. A guy like Lewis Hamilton, who won almost, what, 2.5 times the number of races that Senna won, and more world championships, and statistically, but hands down, has a far better record. He never drove a beast like what Senna drove. And so while I have no doubt that Lewis would have extracted everything out of a beast of a car, his brilliance has never been shown because the car he drives are simply too good, too sterile. They're just not nasty enough. And that applies for all these guys. Everybody knows Max is amazing. But again, he's driving a car that's pretty damn sterile. I think we're doing a disservice to the drivers by producing the cars that we're producing these days.
I think it's a very valid point, Dick. Because again, going back to maybe because I've been in the world of the history of F1 and trying to understand previous generations, I listened to what they would say about the cars, the drivers, and it's like you said, it was a beast, and we're in a more sterile, controlled era. And I
Yep.
can understand why we have progressed to that level.
Sure.
And in many ways, it's necessary because we also know from those past bygone years there was a lot of risk and fatalities and injuries that we don't want to see any racer go through.
Never.
And
Never.
it's a question of like, where is that line and how far does progress to the point that it actually isn't producing the results we want. I think it is an interesting distinction you're drawing between inducing manufacturers to come into the sport versus what fans want to see.
Yep.
And I want to ponder on that a little bit more. I wonder if the inducement towards manufacturers is more on the business side of it.
Oh, yeah.
And especially since the sport has increased its visibility and its monetary value, is this seen as what we see oftentimes in the corporate world, a continued effort to up the ante?
Right.
But at a certain point, you're going to see a decline because, like, it's just
Right.
what is it, the law of diminishing returns?
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, think about it this way. If 30% of Formula One's fan base says these cars just are horrible to watch, the racing is terrible, I'm going to go watch something else. Well, what does that do? I mean, then it doesn't matter how many manufacturers you got in there. If you lose 30% of your fan base, guess what? The
correct.
manufacturer is going to be, hey, nobody's watching us. We're out.
Correct. Well, and now in the age of streaming and the age of everyone having a phone basically in their hands, it's about attention. And you're competing not just against other sports, you're competing for people's attention. And there's enough stuff that there is out there that even the most ardent of fans will eventually go, this isn't worth my time. So, yeah, I hope that our pessimism that seems to be kind of coming out right now, I want to be proven wrong because I really do want this sport to thrive. I believe in
Yep.
it. And I know you do too.
Yeah.
And so hopefully it will not go as far as either one of us are thinking in the
Right.
negative space right now. Like,
Right.
so I hope anybody
Exactly.
listening hears that. Like, we're not trying to bash F1 or anybody in the FIA or any of that. It's just concerns that we're raising as ardent fans of the sport.
Exactly.
So that was the disclaimer. While we are allowed to have opinions. Okay, so I feel like you've done a fantastic job. I hope our audience will send us feedback and let us know how they felt like this
Yeah,
one.
for sure.
I want to say thank you. I have consumed a lot of content trying to understand the F1 regulations that are going to be implemented in 2026, but I think you've done a very thorough but not overwhelming distillation of all of this that I feel is approachable, and I believe our audience will agree with me. So thank you, Dick, for taking
Of
the time to
course.
do this. I
Yeah.
know that it was not an easy task, but you
No.
did a fantastic job.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, I had to get up to speed on this and then say, okay, what does this really mean? And so
Mhm.
anyway, hopefully everybody got something out of this. So
I think so. Well, so on that note, I will say I look forward to our next conversation.
likewise.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.